Hello, and welcome to the very first lecture of our online course. This is Chapter 1, Elements of Music, a chapter where we will be going into the parts of music that we need to listen to more closely to have a better understanding of it. Please be reminded that the lectures of this course do not have the full information of each chapter, and you are encouraged to read your book and make sure you get all of the additional knowledge required for your tests or exams. Now, we've talked a little bit about listening to music and listening a little bit closer and a little bit more thoroughly. But to really understand music and to really appreciate it, as the name of the course suggests, we need to talk about the specific pieces of music and what makes a piece of music what it is. To get into that, we talk about the elements of music. And in this chapter, we will be discussing a few of those elements: rhythm, melody, and harmony. These first few slides serve as kind of exposition, just a little introduction about what gets music started, which of course is sound. So of course, once air particles are disturbed, or once they start vibrating, we get a sound. Now, any musical sound is described as a tone or a note, and they are all described by how high or low they are with a term that we call pitch. And every single pitch is based on that tone's frequency, or how many times it vibrates per second. So when a pitch is higher, we call that having a faster frequency, more vibrations per second. When a pitch is lower, it has a slower frequency, so it vibrates in less vibrations per second. If you are familiar with music in any way, you know that pitches are notated on a staff, and the dots on the 5 lines of the staff show how high or low a pitch is. So the higher the note, the higher the pitch, or the faster the frequency. The space between pitches is described as an interval, which can be seen on a piano or on the music staff itself. Whenever pitches are closer together, we call that having a narrow or small interval. When pitches are further apart, we call that having a wide interval or a larger interval. If pitches are exactly the same, then that interval is pretty much zero. We call that a unison sound. If pitches are the same, but they are what we call an octave apart, that means that the vibrations of the frequency is twice as fast as the lower note. Now, moving on past the introduction of sounds and pitch, we're going to start talking about, again, the elements of music, the pieces of music that make it what it is. And one of those elements is dynamics. Dynamics essentially is the loudness or the softness of a piece of music. And whenever we listen to a piece of music, or if I ask you in an assignment to describe the dynamics of a piece of music, these are the terms you should use to answer that question, to analyze your piece of music. So dynamics range from very soft to very loud, but since a lot of our musical culture comes from Italy, as you will learn later in the class, we use Italian terms to describe our dynamics. Now, these are here on this slide, and you should definitely copy them down or print them out because you will be asked to use these terms when you describe a piece of music. If a piece of music sounds very loud to you, then you will look up very loud and write down fortissimo. This is a fortissimo piece of music. If it's soft or very soft, you would use the words piano, pianissimo, and so on. So make sure you reference this slide for the terms that you will use later in this course to describe the dynamics of a piece of music. Other dynamic terms that we will be using include crescendo and decrescendo, which are basically like turning up the volume or turning down the volume. These terms might be used in your analyses if you hear a piece of music that starts off piano and grows to forte, and you would call that a crescendo. Sometimes a piece of music doesn't crescendo or decrescendo at all and it stays the same volume level. So do not be surprised if you don't use these terms while you're listening to a piece of music and analyzing it. Moving on from dynamics, we're going to talk about rhythm. Now, rhythm is defined as the flow of music through time and a combination of long and short sounds and silence, which is kind of a hard definition to grab a hold of. But basically, rhythm itself is when the music happens and how the notes relate to each other as far as having some sort of a beat. Now, every piece of music has rhythm. You have to. If the music is being played, then there's something to say when that music is being played or sung. But not every piece of music has a beat. Now, we all have a good concept of beat, all right, that steady rhythm that every piece of music has. But as we start to look at the earlier pieces of music that we will be studying in a couple of weeks, beat was not always something that was a part of music. So we will hear music that didn't have a beat at all. For example, as opposed to music that does have a beat. And in this next example, you're not going to hear something like drums or something that you can necessarily dance to, as we commonly refer to beat. But beat more means a steady pulse with which we can hear. And as the slide says, maybe we can tap our feet to it or snap our fingers to it. It doesn't necessarily mean that there are drums behind it. Now, when a piece of music does have a beat, we use the element known as meter to describe the organization of strong and weak beats. This means that we can hear a pulse and we can hear a stronger part of the pulse every few beats in the music. If you are familiar with music at all and you are a part of choir or band, or maybe even just remembering your lessons from your elementary general music classes, you know what time signatures are. And essentially, the different types of meter are the different time signatures that we have learned and we have used in those music classes. So, for example, a duple meter would be our 2/4, where you feel a strong beat, beat 1, followed by a weak beat, beat 2, and that repeats. Triple meter would be our 3/4, where the downbeat, once again, is the strongest beat, as it always is, but then it is followed by 2 weak beats, beats 2 and 3. And we feel that strong beat every 3 beats. Now, quadruple meter is very similar to duple meter because we feel that strong downbeat followed by a weak beat. But the beat after that, even though it feels strong, is not quite as strong as the downbeat. So it's slightly heavier than 2, but not quite as heavy as 1. Now, quadruple meter is our 4/4 or common time. And oftentimes, when you listen to a piece of music, any piece of music, it will probably be in quadruple meter. So, when you are listening and you're asked to analyze a piece of music, if you're not sure what the meter is, chances are it is quadruple, as that is the meter that we see most often in pieces of music. Now, these are a few additional meter terms that you may see on your test, but we probably will not be using them past chapter 1. Terms like upbeat, all right, the beat that comes before a downbeat, or other odd types of meter that do exist in music that are just very rare, like sextuple meter or quintuple or septuple meters, all 6, 5, and 7 beats per measure. Syncopation is a style where notes are played on the weak beat, or the accents are put on the weak beat, which give the music a unique style. The next element we will be discussing is tempo. And like our dynamic slide, please take note of the Italian terms that we will be using to describe tempo. Now, the definition of tempo is the pace or the speed of the music. And if you hear the beat as a very slow beat, you will use the Italian term largo or grave to describe it. Or if the piece is fast or very fast, you will use the terms allegro or vivace. Again, make sure you have these terms ready so that when you are asked to describe the tempo of a piece of music, you know exactly what to say in the Italian terminology that we will be using. Now, there are some additional terms that we have that add to some of our tempo terms, such as molto, meaning very, or meno, meaning less. Any of these terms can be added to a tempo classification. Similar to the crescendo and decrescendo terms that we discussed earlier, accelerando and ritardando means to gradually change the tempo. Again, these aren't terms that you will use when describing every piece of music, as several of them do keep the same tempo throughout, but these are good terms to use in case you do hear them in an example of music. Other important terms include rubato, which means freedom with tempo or being able to push and pull the tempo freely throughout the music. So the tempo is very unsteady in a rubato section of music. Now, melody may be one of the more important elements of music, as it is literally the primary voice that we hear when we listen to music. If you think of a song right now, and chances are it has a vocalist, that vocalist is singing the melody in the piece of music, the part of the music that we recognize, that we sing along with, the part that we think about whenever we think about a piece of music. Melody is very important, and when we listen to it, we can describe it a number of ways. But in this course, when we discuss it, we will basically use two qualifiers. First of all, we will use legato or staccato. So when you hear a piece of music, do you hear that the notes flow smoothly from one another? If so, you would call that legato. If the notes are a little bit more detached, a little bit more separated, you would call that staccato. The other qualifiers we would use are simple and complex when describing a melody in a piece of music. Now, a simple melody could be described as maybe the notes go slowly from one to another. You could also describe it as being very easy to sing along with. Many vocal tunes have a simple melody because they want people to be able to sing along with them. Now, a complex melody would have much faster notes. Could be in reference to an instrumental piece of music, which aren't necessarily made so that people can sing along with. And sometimes instruments can play and perform notes much faster than we can sing along. So if notes are moving a little bit quicker, we would call that more of a complex melody. So we have two examples here. The first example could be described as legato and simple. Because the notes are very smooth and connected, and they move pretty slowly from one to another. You can find yourself able to sing along with that easily. Now, this next example is an example of a staccato melody as well as a complex melody. And you'll hear the notes moving very quickly, and they are short and detached. So you're welcome to try to sing along with that if you want to, but you may find it's a little bit more difficult to accomplish that. Other melodic terms we will be seeing and using in this course include phrase, which is a section of a melody, pretty much like a sentence in English. And music comes together, melodic melodies come together to make phrases that we can hear and understand. Those phrases usually end with some sort of pause or some sort of conclusion that we call a cadence. We will also be seeing the term sequences a little bit later in the course, which are different melodies repeated at different pitch levels. Maybe the same melody moving up or the same melody moving down. Again, we will see that as an example, usually pretty much in the classical period. And the term theme, which is basically a short section of a melody, sometimes modified or manipulated by composers to create different musical ideas. Again, these are things that we will see later in the course as we learn about other styles of music. The final element we will discuss in this chapter is the element of harmony. Now, there are many parts that go into harmony, musically speaking, but for our class, when we listen to a piece of music, we will discuss only a few simple qualifications. On this slide, you will find several terms that you will be tested on, so make sure you read up on those on this slide and out of your book because you will need to know them. Now, when we listen for harmony, there are a few things that we can hear. First of all, consonants. The definition of consonants is a stable harmony that does not have any tension. usually a strong chord. Pieces of music often start and end with consonants. Dissonants, on the other hand, are unstable or tense harmonies, and we can hear that we need those harmonies to go somewhere. We feel like they need to resolve. So, an example of consonants would sound like this. Dissonance is a little bit harder to describe, but our sound example here is just a sound of tension and something that does not quite sound right. Now, for our class, when you are listening for harmony, I'll ask you to describe it one of two ways. First of all, there is major, and when a piece of music has a major harmonic quality, we would describe it as sounding positive or having a happy sound. On the other hand, there is minor, which has more of a negative sound. It might sound sad or menacing. And there are musical properties behind major and minor harmonies. But for a general studies class like this is, for musicians and non musicians alike, you'll basically be asked to say, do you hear the major happy sounds in this piece of music? Or do you hear something more minor and negative sounding? Now, an example of something sounding major sounds like this. While something minor has this kind of sound. That concludes the lecture for Chapter 1, where we have gone over 5 elements of music that you will be asked to use and describe later in this course. Go through any notes that you may have missed, any slides that you need to review. They are posted on the site. And again, please make sure you read your book, read Chapter 1, as well as the other chapters that are due this week to understand the full breadth of our information.